Today I'm going to show you the family tree of Korean monarchs, starting with the kingdom of Shilla, continuing through the kingdoms of Goryeo and Chosun, and going all the way down to the 20th century empire of Korea. I'll be using my Asian royal family trees chart, which can be purchased as a poster from my website usefulcharts.com. On this chart, the Korean monarchs are shown in blue and are located between the Chinese emperors, shown in red, and the Japanese emperors, shown in yellow. For the first 600 or 700 years of the Common Era, the area we now call Korea was dominated by three separate kingdoms. There was Goryeo, Baekje, and Shilla, and there was actually a fourth, less dominant kingdom here. However, in the 660s CE, the kingdom of Shilla was able to conquer the other kingdoms and unite Korea for the first time. The king at that time was King Moonmu, and therefore we're going to start with him. However, I should probably point out these two queens up here. They were among the last Shilla monarchs to reign prior to unification, and like Moonmu, were members of the Kim dynasty, although they come from different branches. Queen Sondok is well known as being the first female monarch in Korean history. In the same century, of course, we get the first female monarch in Chinese history. And earlier, actually, Japan had a female monarch as well. So this time period is well known as having several reigning queens and empresses. But back to Moonmu. Moonmu united the Korean peninsula with the help of the Tang dynasty, which was a major power in the region at the time. Over there, the Tang dynasty was presiding over a golden age in Chinese history. But after Shilla emerged as the sole Korean kingdom, conflict between the Tang dynasty and Shilla began. Had the Tang dynasty been able to conquer Korea at this point, Korean history might have gone in a very different direction. It would have been mostly swallowed up by Chinese history. We may not have gotten the unique Korean culture that we have today. But Shilla held its ground, and their line of kings during this period continued. Now, I'm not going to explain every king on the chart until I get down closer to the present, but I'll hit the main highlights. So we get a King Sondok, not to be confused with the earlier Queen Sondok. The famous bell of King Sondok, which weighs 19 tons, is named after him. Eventually, though, the males in Moonmu's branch die out, and King Sejong was the last male line descendant of him. He was assassinated, and eventually the throne passes to a different branch of the dynasty via King Wongsong. That branch ruled over 100 years, but by the time we get to the year 900, the Korean peninsula had once again been divided into three kingdoms. We therefore get what's called the later Three Kings period. But that period was very short because pretty soon a new dominant kingdom came to unify and rule all of Korea, the kingdom of Goryeo. It is from this word, Goryeo, that the current name of the country, Korea, comes from. The first king of Goryeo was King Taejo. He defeated the last king of Shilla, and therefore the Wang dynasty became the new ruling dynasty. The unification that occurred at this point is usually seen as being more complete than the unification that occurred under Shilla. So from this point forward, Korea was fully united for over 1,000 years, up until the division of North Korea and South Korea in 1948. Whereas the kingdom of Shilla roughly corresponded with the Tang dynasty in China, the kingdom of Goryeo roughly corresponded to the Song dynasty in China. It was generally speaking a golden age for Korea, particularly for Buddhism. However, when we go down and get to this part of the tree, we get an important change in terms of the power structure within the kingdom. During the reign of King Mu Jong, there was a military coup in which certain leaders successfully replaced Mu Jong with his brother, Mu Jong, whom they used as a puppet king. In fact, the next 4 kings were basically puppet kings as well, with various military leaders holding the real power, in particular the powerful Cho family. This period of military dictatorship coincided with the first shogunate in Japan, a similar form of military-run government. But in the 1200s, Korea and the rest of Asia faced an even bigger problem, the Mongol Empire. The Mongols wreaked havoc in both China and Korea, but although they were able to conquer China and establish the Yuan dynasty, they never did officially conquer Korea. Instead, Korea was able to placate the Mongols by agreeing to certain terms and basically ended up becoming their vassal state instead. One of the things you can see here is that one of the kings of Goryeo was forced to marry the daughter of the great Kublai Khan. Therefore, the rest of the Korean kings in this dynasty are all descended from him, as well as from the even greater Genghis Khan. In fact, a lot of the kings on the chart in this section here married Mongol wives as well. Eventually, though, several things occurred which eventually led to the demise of the Mongols and the birth of a new Korean kingdom. First, there was the Black Death, which, although it is thought to have begun in Asia, we do not actually have a lot of information on how exactly it impacted countries like Korea. But we do know that the Red Turban rebellions in China occurred around the same time, and those eventually led to the Yuan dynasty being replaced by the Ming dynasty there. King Wu was king of Goryeo during this time, and he ordered his top general to preemptively attack China. Knowing that such a move was unwise, that general instead deposed King Wu and took control of the government, placing the king's 10-year-old son Chang on the throne instead. But a year later, both father and son were assassinated, and a distant relative was put on the throne instead. But he had a short reign and was eventually deposed as well. And instead, that general became king instead. He is known as King Sejong of Chosun. And at this point, we get several important changes. First of all, the Yi dynasty was now the ruling house instead of the previous Wang dynasty. Second, the kingdom itself was renamed. We go from the kingdom of Goryeo to the kingdom of Chosun, nowadays spelt with a J, but on older maps you might see it spelled with a CH. Finally, whereas Buddhism flourished during the Goryeo kingdom, the Chinese philosophy of Confucianism was promoted during the Chosun kingdom. Now, note that both the first king of the Goryeo kingdom and the first king of the Chosun kingdom are both named King Sejong. That's because Sejong means great ancestor, so just be careful not to confuse the two. King Sejong of Chosun had 8 sons, but he was unsure which one he should appoint as his successor. The son who would eventually become Sejong was the most capable, but the prime minister at the time convinced the king to appoint a different son instead. The prime minister then conspired to have Sejong killed, but Sejong heard about the plot and had the prime minister killed instead, as well as 2 of his own brothers. The king was disheartened by all the infighting and immediately resigned, naming this son as his successor. But that king, Jong, ruled for only a few short years, and then Sejong became king in the end anyway. Sejong was a harsh ruler and basically transformed the king's role into that of an absolute monarch. After 18 years as king and after making lots of reforms, he stepped aside and appointed his son, the king. That son became known as King Sejong and is generally considered the greatest king in Korean history. He was successful in managing domestic affairs as well as foreign affairs. On top of this, he encouraged advances in science, technology, and education. However, the accomplishment he is most remembered for is the invention of the Korean alphabet called Hangul. He invented the characters and writing system himself, and to this day, Hangul is considered by many linguists to be one of the most clever writing systems ever invented. If you want a copy of this chart, which not only explains the Korean writing system, but also Japanese, Chinese, and every other major writing system used in the world today, I also sell this as a poster. Sejong was followed by his very ill son, Mu Jong, who died just 2 years later. Sejong's grandson, Jong, therefore became king, but Jong was just a boy at the time and was overthrown and later killed by his uncle Sejong. Sejong was followed by his son, Sejong, who died at age 20 after a very short reign, and so the throne then passed to his nephew, Seongjo, who had a much longer reign, during which time Chosun prospered. We then get one of the least popular kings in Korean history, King Yeonsang-gun, who is known for all kinds of violent, cruel, and selfish acts. Eventually, court officials conspired against him and removed him from power, placing his brother Jong on the throne instead. Jong proved to be a much better ruler, but often ended up being controlled by other powerful individuals, such as Cho Gwanjo, famous for his Confucian-based reforms. We then get a short reign by his son Injong, and then another son who was quite young and died without heirs, so the throne then passes to a nephew who became King Seongjo. Seongjo had a long reign, but during that time, Korea faced many problems, including an invasion by Japan that lasted 6 years. In the end, with the help of Ming China, Korea was able to hold off the Japanese and eventually they withdrew. Seongjo was followed by his son Gwanghae-gun, who was eventually replaced in a coup by his nephew Injo. During the reign of King Seongjo, Korea faced a new enemy. By this point, the Ming dynasty was starting to fight with the Qing dynasty for control of China. The Qing dynasty is sometimes referred to as the Manchu dynasty, as they originated in Manchuria, north of China proper. Eventually, the Qing dynasty defeated and replaced the Ming dynasty in China, and they also managed to defeat the kingdom of Chosun in Korea. However, Korea did not become part of the Qing Empire. Instead, it continued to exist as an independent kingdom, but was basically a vassal state of the Qing dynasty, which means it had to pay tribute to China and do whatever China wanted. The upside of this is that Korea experienced a long period of peace that lasted about 200 years. In fact, during the long reigns of King Seongjo and his grandson Jeongjo, the country experienced a bit of a renaissance. During this time, European powers were, of course, starting to become important political players in East Asia as well. However, like Japan, Korea initially promoted a policy of remaining isolated from outside influences. But this broke down in the mid-1800s. Eventually, the male line of King Seongjo died out, and the dynasty therefore had to look really far back in their lineage to find an heir. The person that was next in line became King Gojong, and he ended up becoming the final king of Chosun. He was a contemporary of the Japanese Emperor Meiji, who famously reformed Japan into a modern industrial state with an advanced military. Initially, during the reign of these two monarchs, Korea and Japan started to trade somewhat peacefully. But as Japan's economic interests in Korea grew, it eventually led to war. Remember that officially, Korea was still basically a vassal of the Chinese emperor. So in 1894, Japan went to war against China, primarily over Korea. Much of the fighting took place there as well. In the end, Japan won that war, and Korea basically ended up as a vassal to Japan now instead of to China. Of course, I'm using the term vassal quite loosely here. Since it was now free from China, Korea actually declared itself to be its own empire at this point. So King Gojong became Emperor Gojong. But the Empire of Korea was short-lived. After winning a nearby war against Russia, Japan took on the official role of protector of Korea. They forced Gojong to abdicate and replaced him with his son Seonjo. But that didn't last long, and in 1910, Japan officially annexed Korea, meaning that Korea became part of the Japanese Empire. It remained part of Japan until the end of World War II. Then, shortly after that, it divided into North and South Korea, both republics, which is the situation that we have today. Now, as is my custom at the end of these videos, let's quickly discuss who would be king of Korea today if they decided to reinstate their monarchy. There are actually many descendants of Emperor Gojong alive today. However, the person who is generally considered to be the current head of the house is named Yi Seok. He is the son of Yi Kang, who was a younger brother of the last emperor of Korea. So that makes him a grandson of Emperor Gojong. Yi Seok is currently 77 and has no sons. He therefore recently named an American citizen of Korean descent named Andrew Lee as his successor. I'm not quite sure how Andrew Lee is related to the Yi dynasty, so if anyone knows, maybe you can tell us in the comments. So there you have it, a history of the Korean monarchy from King Moonmu all the way down to the future king pretender, Andrew Lee. Again, if you're looking for a copy of this poster, you can head over to my website, usefulcharts.com. If you find history, genealogy, and monarchies interesting, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you check the playlists, you'll find that I have videos covering the family trees of famous dynasties from all over the world. And to see what else I'm up to, follow me on Twitter or Instagram. Thanks for watching.